May 18, 1917. Mandatory duty. The United States Congress passed the Selective Service Act, authorizing the federal government to raise a national army through conscription. This legislation marked a critical shift in American military policy during World War I. The act was introduced shortly after the United States entered the war in April 1917. President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law to address the immediate need for a larger military force. At the time, the standing army was insufficient for overseas engagements, and voluntary enlistment numbers were low. The Selective Service Act required all men aged 21 to 30 to register for military service. Later amendments extended the age range to include men from 18 to 45. The initial registration began on June 5, 1917. By the end of World War I, approximately 24 million men had registered, of whom nearly 2.8 million were drafted. The Act created the Selective Service System, which remains the framework for draft registration in the United States. The law sought to distribute the burden of military service fairly. Draft boards were established at the local level to determine exemptions and deferments. This structure aimed to reduce the influence of wealth and social status on draft outcomes, though critics argued that some inequities persisted. Still, the system was more equitable than the conscription practices of the Civil War era, which had allowed draftees to pay for substitutes. The Selective Service Act was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1918 in Arver v. United States, commonly referred to as the selective draft law cases. The court ruled that the draft did not violate the 13th Amendment's ban on involuntary servitude, affirming the government's authority to compel military service. The Act's implementation was logistically complex but generally effective. The War Department managed the process with the assistance of thousands of local boards. The draft played a central role in building the American Expeditionary Forces under General John J. Pershing. These forces participated in major campaigns in Europe, including the Meuse-Argonne offensive, which contributed to the Allied victory. The Selective Service Act of 1917 had a lasting impact on American military policy. It established precedents for future draft legislation, including during World War II and the Cold War. The structure introduced in 1917 was refined over time, but remains the basis of the current selective service system. Though the draft ended in 1973, registration is still required for men aged 18 to 25. The passage of the Selective Service Act reflected a recognition that modern warfare required organized, large-scale mobilization. It signaled a departure from reliance on volunteerism and demonstrated the government's capacity to mobilize resources efficiently in a time of global conflict. For enthusiasts of historical ephemera, visit history-collectors.com to find collectibles that might complement your collection. You can own a piece of history.